Continue in our book reading, The Seventh Vial by J.A. Wylie. Remember, I'm going to remind you, this was written over 150 years ago. We're in chapter 17. It is entitled The Commencement and Termination of the 1260 Days. We now come to discuss the question of time. There is a certain period fixed by God between the birth and the death of every man. The same providence, by an irresistible decree, has numbered the days of the man of sin. Between his appearance above the dark flood and his descent into his burning grave, an interval will elapse of the 1260 years. This number occurs in the Apocalypse in a connection with the existence of Antichrist, not less than 5 times. The Gentiles were to tread the holy city underfoot 40 and 2 months. The witnesses were to prophesy, clothed in sackcloth, 1,260 days. The woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of her, no, a place prepared of God for 1,260 days. And in the wilderness she was nourished for a time and times and half a time. Power was given unto the beast of the sea to continue 40 and 2 months. The period is variously expressed in days, months, times, but its length is the same in all 1260 symbolic days or years. The prophecy of Daniel 2 limits the duration of Antichrist to the same period, a time, times, and the dividing of times. Thus, as regards the length of the period, there is no doubt. The papacy cannot possibly survive its 1260th year dated from its rise. This is the hour of its doom, beyond which neither craft nor power can prolong its existence. Then it goeth into perdition. The main point here, then, is to ascertain the period of the rise of the Antichrist, 1260 years, added to which will give the epoch of its fall. Of course, its rise must be placed subsequent to the Gothic invasion, for out of that flood did the 10 kingdoms emerge. The 10 kingdoms, as we have already stated, were completed by the opening of the 6th century. We are not, therefore, to look for the full development of the papacy before that century, nor are we to look for any era very much subsequent, as must be evident from our former explanations, that the 10 kingdoms of Europe, united and governed by the Pope, their last and 8th head, forms the beast of the abyss, whose continuance is limited to 42 months. Do we find any strongly marked epoch occurring soon after the commencement of this century in the history of the 10 kingdoms or of the papacy? Do we find any signal change to the constitution of the first, or any signal enlargement or confirmation in the powers and claims of the second? We do. About the year 530, we find a change passing upon the 10 Gothic kingdoms, which made them, in fact, Roman kingdoms, and linked them to the fourth monarchy of Daniel, and made them, in truth, but a continuation of that Roman Empire to which the Gothic invasion had given a deadly wound. From AD 530 to AD 533, Gibbon tells us the Emperor Justinian published his immortal works, the Code, the Pandects, and the Institutes. These contain a digest of the laws of the ancient Roman Empire, henceforth became the law of the 10 kingdoms. Gibbon remarks that by the execution of this work, Justinian, the Greek emperor of Constantinople and the East, was the legal successor of the Latin shepherd who had planted a colony on the banks of the Tiber. Much more would we remark was it true of the 10 kingdoms, which now began to be governed by the laws of ancient Rome. and into which the very spirit of Rome was thus breathed, that it had now become the legal successor of the Latin kingdom, which Romulus founded on the banks of the Tiber. The promulgation of the Justinian Code seems to mark the epoch of the full emergence of the tin horn beast above the Gothic flood. The Ten Kingdoms became then the true lineal descendants of pagan Rome. 75 years later, we find another strongly marked epoch in the history of the papacy. In AD 606, the Emperor Phocas confirmed a former why can't I say that word? Recognition of the Pope's authority by Justinian by constituting the Pope universal bishop and requiring all the churches to acknowledge the papal supremacy. And in AD 608, Phocas gave Pope Boniface the Pantheon, which, from being a temple originally dedicated to all the pagan gods, was henceforth dedicated to the worship of the Virgin Mary and all the martyrs. It had been the high place of pagan idolatry, and now it became the high place of anti Christian idolatry. We would request our readers specially to mark these two stages in the rise of the papacy. They are Justinian's edict, say AD 532, and Phocas's edict in 606. Others have traced yet a third stage in the rise of the papacy, the era of Charlemagne. Charlemagne, king of France, was crowned emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo in AD 800. By the help of Charlemagne, the Pope's temporal authority joined the Roman See being abolished, and the Pope vested in his authority and their territories, thus fulfilling the prophecy of Daniel that three of the horns should be plucked up before the little horn. We now behold the Antichrist not only risen, but fully revealed to the world. From the summit of the seven hills, he shows himself to Christendom, decked out in the glories of the Triple Crown and claiming the blasphemous title of Christ's victor and God's vice regent. From which of these three epochs are we to date the commencement of the 1260 years? The opinion that there may be a double or perhaps even a triple commencement of this period is very probable. It is continuanced by a prediction long since fulfilled. The 70 years of Jeremiah determined the length of the captivity in Babylon, but there was at three several times a carrying away, and of course the question came to be from which of these periods the commencement of the 70 years should be dated. It was found that there were three commencing stages in the captivity, so there were three terminating stages in the return, with exactly 70 years between each. So the three stages in the rise of the papacy, there may be three answering stages in its downfall and total extinction. Wow, I had no idea. I don't know about you all, but I did not know any of that. I'm going to have to look that up. If we date the commencement of the 1200, hold on, I kind of lost my place because I don't even know what to think right now. Okay. If we date the commencement of the 1260 years from the era of Justinian in 532, we are brought down to 1792. If we date from the era of Phocas, 606 or 608 through 608, we are brought down to 1866 to 1868. And if we date from the era of Charlemagne, 800, we cannot look for the downfall of popery till 2060. Man, that's a long time away. Let us examine these three epics a little more particularly and see how they correspond with the present state of the world and of the papacy. We feel satisfied that we are warranted to make the era of Justinian the primary commencement, at least of the 1260 years. At that epoch, we hold the 10 kingdoms risen and governed by Roman law, the beast from the sea. If to that we are to add 1260 years, we are brought down, as we have said, to 1792, the era of the French Revolution. How does that period correspond? Was there any similarities between the rise of the papacy in 532 and its fall in 1792? Isn't that where Napoleon came in? I'm not sure. Let's keep reading. A very striking similarity. In AD 532, we see the 10 kingdoms risen. In 1792, we see them falling before a tremendous political tempest. But further, the Code of Justinian first recognized the Pope's absolute ecclesiastical supremacy, virtually gave the saints into his hand, and placed the civil sword at his disposal. 1260 years, therefore, thereafter, at the breaking out of the French Revolution, the leading kingdom in continental Europe, and that one which for ages had been the chief stay of the papacy, abolished the Pope's supremacy, declared the clergy totally independent of the See of Rome, vested the election of bishops in the departmental authority, and to complete the change, made a national profession of atheism. Really? I didn't know all that. The two epochs, in their bearing on the papacy, appear the very counterparts of each other. At the one epoch, we find the supreme civil power bent on aggrandizing the Pope, framing all its laws with that special view, and subjecting both secular and spiritual authority to him. At the other epoch, we find the supreme civil power bent on the Pope's overthrow, enacting laws to effect that object, and emancipating both the secular and spiritual authorities from his sway. The manifold calamities of which the revolution was productive to the Pope, we shall have a future occasion of stating. We only here further remark that the tremendous blow then afflicted on Rome, she was somewhat repaired, but is very far from having fully recovered. The second epoch, that of Phocas, AD 606 to 608, brings us to 1866 to 68. All admit that the Pope was by this time vested in the title and powers of Christ's vicar. The general consent on this point warrants the conclusion that at this era there was a fuller manifestation of Antichrist, that now at least he was fully come, and that at the corresponding era of 1866 to 1868, he may be overtaken by the plagues of his final ruin. But though the papal system may, about that time, begin to be broken up and swept away as a government, remnants of popery may linger in being, and the full glory of the millennium, consisting in the restoration of the Jews and the full conversion of the Gentile world, may not be realized till toward AD 2000. Are you serious? Forming a third period corresponding to the era of Charlemagne. What? I cannot read that again. And the full glory of the millennium, consisting in the restoration of the Jews and the full conversion of the Gentile world, may not be realized till toward AD 2000, forming a third period corresponding to the era of Charlemagne. Daniel speaks of two periods, one of 30 and the other of 45, making 75 years in all, which are to be added to the 1260 days. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days, which are just 30 days added to the 1260. 30 years after the termination of the 1260 years, we may expect some event bearing with decided efforts on the downfall of Antichrist. But a still more blessed change may be expected 45 years after that again, for it is added, Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,330 days. It is a remarkable coincidence that in the rise of Antichrist, there were 75 years between his primary appearance at the era of Justinian and his secondary at the era of Focus, and that we find an era of corresponding length in his predicted downfall extending from the French Revolution to 1866 to 68, which marks most probably the epoch of his consummated ruin, the interval being filled up with the plagues of the consummation. It is the claim to be Christ's victor that constitutes the Pope, the Antichrist. This claim involves in its supreme dominion, temporal as well as spiritual, and to us it appears a matter of no moment at what time he obtained his insignificant patrimony, seeing his supreme dominion was neither in point of theory nor in point of fact founded upon it. The moment that the Bishop of Rome avowed himself the vicar of Christ and had that claim acknowledged, the Antichrist was come. He had a character allowed him which placed him above sovereigns, entitled him to dispose of their crowns and kingdoms, and to press into his service, when occasion required, the revenues and armies of Europe. This claim was first admitted by Justinian in 533, and more formally and fully recognized by Focus in 608. These 75 years form a broad line, marking off the era of the reign of Antichrist and the 1260 days of sackcloth to the witnesses, and a line of equal breadth will mark the termination of his reign, filled up by two terrible catastrophes, the first of which has already passed over the world, and the last is most probably opening upon it. The former symbolized the apocalypse by the harvest, and the latter by the vintage. There are three and only three great lines in prophecy, and though the starting point of each is different from that of the others, all three have a common termination, and that common termination lies within our own era. The first and longest line is the 7 times, which comprehends the whole period of the domination of idolatry, and by consequence, the whole period of the oppression of the church. We are disposed to say that this period began with the captivity of the 10 tribes under Shalmaneser in BC 728, and running on for 2,525 years. For such is the length of 7 prophetic times, terminated in 1792. The second line is that of the cleansing of the sanctuary. Daniel chapter 8, verses 13 and 14. How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Counted from the pushing of the Persian ram in BC 508, its probable starting point, this line too runs in AD 1792. The third line, also mentioned by Daniel, is the times, and the dividing of times. That is 3 years and a half, or the 1260 symbolic days or years of the apocalypse. Reckoning from the Edict of Justinian in AD 532, when the beast from the sea arose, this period runs out like the other two in 1792. It is striking, first of all, that we should have only three great prophetic lines in the Word of God, and that all three should relate to the same exceptional period of the world's history, even that of Satan's dominion through a succession of idolatrous empires. God, in great mercy to the church, kindled his light to guide her during this dark night, till the dawn of a better state of things should arise. On the side of Satan, these lines are exhibited as eras of triumph. On the side of the church, they are represented as eras of bondage. This would lead us to expect that all three should have a common termination. For the breaking up of idolatry necessarily implies the cleansing of that sanctuary which it had defiled, and the overthrow of Antichrist implies the escape of those whom he had held captive, and who now, no longer called to prophesy against him, put off their sackcloth. It is further remarkable that when we trace down these three lines, each from its most probable commencement to the past, we find them ending together. But still more striking is it that the era of their common convergence should be one of the grand crises of the world. It is the era of the Great French Revolution. That event sounded the knell of the idolatrous despotisms which, in one form or another, had exercised dominion in the earth from the days of Shalmaneser in 1792, and which had been shown to the king in his dream as but one image or structure, from its head of gold to its 10 toes. Surely it is not by chance that the instant, as it were, that these three lines meet, and the aspect of providence should change, that a new drama should open, that a great earthquake should shake the world, and a mighty political tempest should set in, which begins the cleansing of the sanctuary. In the casting down of those despotic thrones and idolatrous altars which had so long defiled Christendom. This event, if the death knell to the world power, was the trumpet of jubilee to the church. It told her that her period of bondage had expired, that her prison doors had been opened, not opened willingly by her great oppressor, but burst open by the mighty earthquake which had shaken the world. Like a voice from heaven, it invited her to arise from the dust, to put away her chains and her sackcloth, to array herself in her beautiful garments, and to come forth into liberty. Her exodus from Egypt was a great event. So too was her exodus from Babylon. These the church had not ceased to celebrate in her songs, but the grandest deliverance of the past were too pale in the presence of that complete, final, and majestic exodus which was now approaching. The song of Moses was to swell into the mightier and loftier song of the Lamb, and this sublime melody was to roll its numbers down the ages till time should merge into eternity. Daniel adds a supplementary line to the three great lines we have mentioned. This line begins when the others terminate and runs on 75 years beyond them. Reckoning from 1792 or 1793, the acme of the French Revolution, these 75 years terminate with the present year. They probably mark the period during which the final plagues, those which the seven thunders uttered, will be inflicted on Antichrist. With terrible, stunning, consuming swiftness will plague follow plague, till at the end of the 75 years they will culminate in a tremendous stroke, an all-embracing convulsion, which will shake in pieces and lay prostrate in ruin the whole framework, political and ecclesiastical, of Popish Europe. Yet again, the most probable calculation of the world's chronology makes the world's seventh millenary to begin about 75 years after the epoch which we have fixed on as that of the primary termination of the 1260 years. It was an old Jewish opinion and likewise an early Christian belief that after the year 6000, dated from the creation, the world's Sabbath would begin. It wants only a little while to the seventh millenary of time. We are on the eve of the long anticipated Sabbath. It already begins to dawn towards that great first day of a coming era of rest and blessedness. Thrice welcome to a world which has been so long desolated by the tempest of war and so long enthralled by the fetters of superstition, and not less welcome to a church which for so many ages has worn only sackcloth. Unless the shadow on the dial of prophecy greatly misleads us, that mighty consummation is at hand. That's something else. That reminds me of what I had asked in the other reading that we did. Yeah. A day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. God created the heavens and earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh. I wonder. I don't know. All right, brothers and sisters, I'm going to end that there. Next time we'll pick up in chapter 18, but I believe the next reading that I'm going to begin is with this new book. I'm very excited about it. If you can listen to it, I suggest you do, because I think it's going to really open up some things that we just did not know. At least I didn't know. Anyway, keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. I will speak at you here in a few minutes. Love you all. Bye-bye.